Okay, I think we'll make a start now because otherwise we'll be tight for time. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, the second in the series of IIM Summer60s, as we've called them. A range of webinars based on the output from the 2020 survey. My name is Charles Stewart, so I'm a member of the IIM board. My colleague Simon is currently sitting with the IIM logo on him, and he's running the engine room, so to speak. Welcome to all. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Darren Tolhurst. Darren's the Chief Exec Officer of Practicus, and Practicus have been voted the #1 provider in this year's survey. So many congratulations to Darren and the whole team excuse me, at Practicus. Darren's going to share a lot of insights with us in the next hour, starting around what makes a winning ISP, but lots of different areas he's going to cover. Formal stuff, the format is a Zoom webinar, so broadly speaking, we've got about half the time with Darren presenting, speaking, discussing, and the rest of the time for questions from yourselves. Please note these need to be submitted by the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat button, please. So please submit them whenever you want to. We will pick them up and we'll start the discussion at the later point in it. Last point, we're recording the webinar. It will be placed onto our YouTube channel, and a link will be sent to all of you who've registered in the next few days, where you'll be able to review it, and obviously that has the slides and all the conversations. That's it. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Darren.
Charles, many thanks, and obviously good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say thank you to the IIM for inviting me to share some of my thoughts on what makes a winning ISP, market trends, and top tips for interims, if I may be so bold. I think the easiest way I'll handle this is to answer the topics by weaving them together a wee bit, and then looking at a summary and a Q&A, as Charles has mentioned. So I'll also cover, as you can see from this first slide, I'll cover our guiding principle, one plus many, shortly too. A quick bit about me. I think it's just helpful to give a bit of context for those that don't know me, and there's obviously plenty of people that are relationships with Practicus, and there'll be others that aren't. But I got into recruitment back in 1997. This was initially working for a couple of the large IT corporates before joining Practicus in 2006, which was 2 years after launch. I knew the founders already, and I really wanted to be part of the Practicus growth story and bring a sense of parity and collaboration to the three main parties involved in interim management: client, interim, and ISP. I became CEO in 2014, and I've ridden the waves of a fair few macroeconomic challenges during my career. I was thinking about this around the dot-com bubble, 9/11, GFC, the elongated Brexit shenanigans, I'll call them, and that's without getting too political. We've got IR35 changes that happened in the public sector, and now, of course, like everyone here, we're dealing with our first global pandemic. I think the only place to start really is with a massive thank you. And that's to all the interims who voted for Practicus into the #1 spot this year. It's been a real journey for us. We've improved our position year on year, and with all that's been going on in 2020, it's really been a fantastic boost for my team. I want to say also how this has made all the more valuable, given how competitive this league table and indeed our industry overall has become. I think one of the ways, one of the places to start here is, given all the uncertainty that COVID has created, it makes having a trusted and credible brand more powerful than ever. And we found that having strong relationships is crucial in trying to navigate a path through the pandemic. For those of you who made the first session in the series, which was hosted by Ad and Simon on Tuesday, a common theme from the survey, trends, and indeed their commentary is just how important solid relationships are. And that's been the case with every major economic event I've seen, and I'm sure you have too. I would say core to building strong relationships is having strong values, and they have to be part of your DNA. For us, empathy, going the extra mile, honesty and integrity and passion are core to everyone at Practicus. We've evolved and adapted as a business over the years, with the one unwavering constant being our values. Since 2006, we've had a monthly values winner for the team member whose behaviour demonstrates one or more of our values most visibly. I think relationships also follow a really simple path. For me, rapport leads to credibility, leads to trust. I firmly believe a sense of rapport comes first in building any relationship, and only once you've demonstrated credibility can you start to form a precious bond of trust. And of course, this trust is ever more important during times of challenge and uncertainty. So a little bit more about Practicus and our business model. Our purpose, quite simply, helping people navigate change. And our intent is to be the leading and most trusted change partner. You can see here our core areas of change specialisms, and this is fueled by our community. And this is where our guiding principle of 1 + many comes in. We've built a great reputation for working with exceptional interims in their respective fields, and we recognise one good person on their own can achieve great things, solve problems, pass on knowledge, and make a huge impact. However, one good person supported, inspired, and helped by a community of equally excellent people will achieve more. So we call it good people made better. I'd also add, I think particularly in the current climate, being an interim can be a lonely place at times. Interims are meant to be the oracle, have all the answers, and sometimes a simple peer validation or different perspective on a particular business problem can be very much appreciated. In terms of this next slide, this is the main bulk of what I'm keen to talk to you about. And excuse me, here we are. So the key thing here is just preparing for the session. I was reflecting how quickly the pandemic accelerated us into lockdown in March. We'd seen as a business a strong start to 2020, primarily because I think clients were relieved that the previous uncertainty that had dogged much of 2019 around Brexit decision dates and the general election in December had been clarified, at least for the near term, because obviously the transition period deadline was at the end of this year. Then, of course, we entered lockdown very quickly, and what we saw were two very clear patterns. Firstly, and unsurprisingly, new business dried up across many of our sectors. The notable exception was healthcare, which has remained our most consistent sector all year. And the second trend and pattern we saw was that we had record low levels of attrition, meaning a high proportion of our interims were being retained and contracts extended. Now, interestingly, this was across nearly all sectors and disciplines, and I think it's down to a few things, but partly to clients wanting to retain the people they know and trust during a time of crisis. I think it clearly reflects the adaptability of our interim community to work 100% remotely and remain effective in delivering quality output for our clients. And I'd also say our teams functioned very well during lockdown, with our senior leadership adjusting well to the remote management of our people and their support. And yeah, like with everybody, of course it wasn't without challenges. I've got to say, from a personal point of view, I was very glad to be at the teenage end of parenting as opposed to the toddler stage for some of my team. And I mean, it's quite something when you think I've found teenagers just to be remarkably adaptable as long as you have a well-stocked fridge and a stable Wi-Fi. The other thing that, when I reflect, that happened here was that there's a link which I'd like to explore between the work we've done in managing the intended changes to IR35 in the private sector and this low levels of attrition. So what we've done is taken our experience of the public sector IR35 changes from April 17. We put together an in-house project team from Q4 last year and proactively engaged with our clients and interims early to make sense of the legislation, to help make informed decisions around what was next. And of course, the rollout was delayed 12 months. However, these conversations dealt with the potential negative impact of losing an interim mid-project, and we worked with our interims to demonstrate visible value more than ever in the run-up to this new financial year. So in a way, although the rollout got pulled, clients were ahead of having conversations around budget sign-off, purchase orders being raised, and were able to retain a higher proportion of our interims than you'd seasonally expect. And this was all coinciding with lockdown. We also did some analysis on the split between IR35 in the public sector, between inside and outside. And what it showed was that 51% of roles were inside IR35 and 49% were outside. Now, of course, that seems far too convenient, so I had the team rerun the numbers, but actually what it does is reflect our mix of project-based transformation, which would predominantly be outside, and then interim operational management, interim C-suite, maybe maternity cover, long-term sick, and that's often inside. So although COVID's had an impact on the split, with now more operational management interim assignments compared to big transformation programs, but overall, I think trying to navigate this balance between inside and legitimate outside IR35 is massively important, and will equally become important for the private sector next year as we sit here now. In terms of the public sector, my colleague Mark Payne, he's co-hosting a webinar which is dedicated to the public sector as part of the IIM's Summer60Series. So that's early next month. So hopefully some of you can attend that, and you can expect more discussion then around the market trends for the public sector. Now, just looking more broadly from our own personal experience, as the lockdown restrictions began to ease, we started to see new opportunities coming through. So where April and May were very quiet with new assignments, June was busier, July was busier again, and despite the usual holiday challenges in August, we've seen a good number of opportunities this month, and we're just incrementally increasing the pipeline as we head into September and hopefully settle things down with schools going back and all those things that impact the market and confidence in it. The other thing that we look at, of course, is our sector trends. So these are really important because the way COVID has affected the economy is marked depending on the sector. So you might think I'm stating the obvious here, but in terms of how we've operated as a business, we've had a long-running initiative for the business called Balanced Portfolio. It's all about making sure we have a good mix of sectors, good mix of disciplines within our offer. And so things like travel, traditional high street retail, hospitality would have obviously taken an almighty hit, whereas supply chain, logistics, healthcare have been busy. And then looking at things outside of sectors, looking at more from a discipline perspective, digital transformation is in high demand, and we're seeing an increase in organisational restructuring capability and turnaround, which I think that's only going to grow further as we approach the end of the furlough scheme, because you've got to remember clients now need to decide what the size and makeup of their organisations will need to be in order to give them the best chance of retaining or even taking market share in their respective fields. And then finally for this piece, there's the element of economic recovery, and there's an awful lot of commentary out there about the kind of economic recovery we can expect, from a sharp V to a U to a W, or even a disheartening L if the R rate of the infection gets out of control on a major global scale once more. So, I mean, for me, very difficult to influence that from an interim provider perspective. So our focus has to be on breathing confidence into the markets we operate, so that clients are making decisions, they're being creative and nimble amongst the backdrop of uncertainty. So I just say to everyone that market inertia is the big gremlin when it comes to interim change and transformation. And as our purpose is to help people navigate change, we're passionate about ensuring these agendas remain a top priority for our clients, and our community of interims can obviously service those needs. In terms of the next slide, these are a couple of phrases that I've used to describe how I see things in the market. So the first one I see as an ongoing trend is decision by committee. This is where we're seeing extra interview layers. They're being introduced and more stakeholders are involved in the hiring process. And I think this is a result of clients wanting as much consensus as possible in terms of across their business, amongst the leadership teams, and just sharing decision making. Now, I think this is an important market adjustment and needs to be carefully managed between interims, clients, and indeed the providers, because we've got to make sure that in every interview stage or every engagement opportunity, everyone's giving the best account of themselves, and we want to avoid a sense of frustration because of duplication. And then there's also the adaptability around video interviewing, and I think that's going to remain for some time, and I think remote onboarding is going to remain. So that adjustment is really important. And what I would say is interims are able to clearly articulate the relevance of their experience with concise, high impact examples are faring better. So the reason is that the absence of face-to-face meetings makes it high risk to have a highly verbose style So it's much harder to gauge audience engagement without that physical contact of being in the same room. So we're seeing assignment success is much higher with punchy, pithy responses that then lead to engaging dialogue and expansion of key areas of interest to a particular client. So you may be looking at this slide thinking this term RICSID is a typo. However, it's actually an acronym that I introduced to my team a few years ago, and it's stuck. Managing focus, managing boredom threshold, managing the so what test, and it simply stands for rich in content, succinct in delivery. Rich in content, succinct in delivery. And I think it's really pertinent here, both in terms of verbal communication and CV content. In terms of this spirit of breathing confidence into the market, we've seen a big increase in demand for our Ask the Community service. So this is where people can get immediate help with a particular business problem they're facing and talk to someone who's solved their issue before. And we're always looking for practical, real-world advice and input, which makes this whole piece around confidence much more valid. You can see here the way it can benefit. Back to this idea of instilling enough confidence so a client is going to sign off a program, they're going to push harder for budget allocation. It obviously supports our original passion for working collaboratively with our clients and interims alike, and just making sure that everyone is really on the same page when it comes to driving forward business conversation. So you can see from the slide, there's the benefits to all parties, and there's certainly plenty of testimonials relating to ATC on our website at practicus.com. In terms of where we are, I think I've been asked to talk about top tips for interims, and that's against the backdrop of COVID-19. So I know it's an unsettling time, and it's a worrying time for many, and I also know that there should be opportunities building so long as we can work together as an industry to influence market confidence positively. And I think if as a collective, if we can get behind that goal, just to drive forward people that want to make decisions. And as I said earlier, this is uncharted waters for all of us, because no one's ever dealt with a global pandemic, and the economics behind it are also uncharted because it was effectively man-made. There were understandable decisions taken at an economic level and a human protection level and people's well-being to simply turn off the economy. But there wasn't underlying issues around the economy in terms of delinquent debt or some of the GFC where there was no liquidity. That wasn't the case. So I think what we're trying to do now is influence that ability of the market to rebound. And clearly there are plenty of aspects of it outside of our control, but the things that are within our control are the ones that can really hopefully leverage and move the right curve out of this, in terms of it's more like a V or a U as opposed to anything else. So from my point of view, there's a few things I'd say here, and that's focus on your sweet spot, I've called it. And by this I mean that it's competitive out there, and I know if someone's out looking for work and the next assignment, I'd just ask to resist the urge to apply for multiple roles, and when you know deep down you're just not quite right for it. And I think it can be quite attritional if you do keep responding to opportunities and they're hearing nothing. So I'd say channel energy into majoring on key achievements where you've delivered really demonstrable high impact results, and that way I think energy levels and just mental well-being will improve. And once you've identified those opportunities that you feel really confident and positive about, then follow up hard with those, real vigor, and think about the way you can leverage relationships. So the first webinar talked about relationships, as we've already said. I've talked about relationships and the importance they have, and I'd broaden that point to do what I've called network your network. So this is where recommendations become really powerful. So we see many assignments through, whether it be LinkedIn or what have you, there's a large volume of applicants. So think about who in your network may have an existing relationship with specific providers. A recommendation into a recruiter from a trusted source will absolutely lift your chances of having an engaging conversation. And I think by doing that and being really clear and deliberate in follow-ups, that can help engage conversations and can help move things along and elevate people out of the mass sort of CV. I call it the CV factory, but basically elevate out of that, because you've got to bear in mind, I talked about coming from the big IT contractor type organizations. That's not what a typical interim provider business is going to be set up to deal with. So massive volumes of applications or interest is just not going to be where we as interim providers typically are strongest. We're much more about building relationships, being able to get into the real depth of someone's delivery and represent them professionally and in the right way to the right opportunity. So I think that networking is going to be really key. I've mentioned RICSID, rich in content, succinct in delivery. Apply that wherever you can and really test yourselves and be able to articulate those key aspects of your career, your delivery, where you feel most proud, because it really will build the crucial confidence and trust I've talked about. And the other thing I'd say is visible value is critical. So doing all you can for those that are in assignment, clearly doing all you can to remain in that assignment, delivering good quality outcomes, working with your provider consultant to secure an extension or identify another phase or a new project. And I think this also comes down to remaining fully engaged whilst being based remote. So we know that we've seen real success where there's been the regular feedback mechanisms, client stakeholders are kept abreast of exactly what's happening. And I think that visible value is key to being able to not just get to an opportunity, but also to be able to stay in it and keep moving forward. So that's my summary there. In terms of what we can do from here, I mean, given what I just said about volumes and about interim providers not all being geared up with sort of seas and seas of faces welcoming chances to have conversations, I will say though, I'm really keen that for those on this webinar who are keen to have a chat with some of my team, then please, do send your latest CV to our info@practicus.com email, reference the webinar in your cover note, CC me in, and we'll definitely coordinate a suitable follow-up to speak to people. But I mean, do bear with me because I just don't know the likely level of responses we're going to have. But I'm keen to engage and keen to develop our community further and build additional relationships in areas where, of course, we're going to be seeing demand. So in terms of the formal bit, that concludes that part of it. In terms of my presentation, I want to thank you for listening. I hope there's been some interesting, useful aspects to that, and I'll hand back to Charles and Simon to manage the Q&A elements, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Darren. That's really interesting points in there, so thank you. Everybody on the call, we can now throw this open for Q&A. So as we said earlier, please pose your questions through the Q&A button that's at the bottom, and we'll start to deal with those, excuse me, as and when. I got one straight in at the moment, which is an interesting one. So Darren, when you talk about the state of the market in its current form, which kind of sectors, or sorry, which kind of functions are booming or stable within the areas that are buoyant that you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, fair point, absolutely. And I think there's pockets of activity across a number of sectors. So it's a hard one to go, that is simply the area to focus in, because there's the market's moving all the while. And yeah, as I said earlier, the months from June, July into August, hopefully to September, have been improving. But if we take it by sector, then we're seeing a good number of opportunities in operational management around healthcare for service improvement. And I think there's going to be additional work coming around programs being launched to get back on track with things like cancer services, because of course there's the ripple effect of having focused so much on the pandemic that there's all these other aspects of the NHS that need to be caught up with, and that will involve tech, it will involve good quality interim delivery and prioritising waiting lists, for example. That all needs to be adjusted. So I think as we come out of this, there'll be more bandwidth for that. Then I think there's definite opportunity, and this is actually cross-sector, digital transformation is without doubt going to be a big space, and there's a lot of conversations in the market now around where are the opportunities, because although it's been a really, really tough time, there's still a number of people who are saying we're not going back to what was before. And that's encouraging, because people have grasped the opportunity to say, right, we're just accelerating our digital footprint. It could be around innovative supply chain models. That's definitely an area. And then I think turnaround, and certainly private equity backed turnaround, will be a positive space as well, because you can imagine that there's all these fund managers. As I said earlier, there isn't a liquidity issue. It's not like there's no money in the markets. The money is there. It just needs to be repurposed, and it needs to be accessed and spent in the right areas. So I think that particular area, and as I also said, organizational redesign, restructure is going to be a big area too, because the furlough scheme, although it's been most welcome, it is an artificial sense of business viability for the longer term coming out of this. And I think that's where, going into next month, there's going to be a lot of discussions around what's the future state structure focus for organizations to navigate and grow from the current position. Okay,
thank you. Question from Dave. Are you seeing a demand for turnaround experts yet?
Well, as I link that back to this this PE side of things, and organizational restructure. So I think it's starting to build, although I wouldn't say we're prolifically awash with dozens of opportunities for turnaround right now. I think it is going to come out of this sense of the strategy that people take to move things forward, because there's total inertia for those couple of months during lockdown. People have bounced back, and of course you've got to remember, a lot of people were focused on effective remote working, the mental well-being and welfare of their teams, and that took up a huge amount of resource, effort and energy. And it's only now that they're coming out a bit from that to be able to say, right, what's our future strategy, how are we going to build our business, and that will then lead to turnaround. I also think turnaround will play a major part in where PE are involved, in terms of picking up what could be distressed businesses, how are they integrated, how are they reshaped, because they'll want to get their investment portfolios back on track, having had this bump. So that's an area I would keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you. Get one apart from part of a question from Gary, because which is specifically around sort of Practicus's kind of approach to communications. What kind of standards, protocols do you have with clients and candidates alike?
Yeah, if that's to do with how regularly we're talking to people, then absolutely that happens a lot. And as you talk, as I mentioned a few times, relationships are key. The relationships only work if you're in communication with people. So I'm not sure if he means there's a sort of specific level of calling or engagement, but I mean, I do know my teams have been focused very much on engaging with clients. We've had the Ask the Community service that's been a major engagement tool as well, that's knitted together people in the market to look at business problems, and that's been very well received, because the good element to that is that it's not just one bit of dialogue. There's normally a conversation that leads to a conversation that leads to some output or some thinking that's then shared, and it's multi-dimensional in terms of the engagement points.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. One from Mark. He's a new entrant into the market, or interim market, I should say. He's got plenty of experience in digital specific kind of change projects. He's kind of wondering, how is the market there, and is it around, is it across sectors, or is it for projects, or is it purely for sort of gap filling roles that you're seeing?
I think it's definitely cross sector. So of all the various areas we operate in, certain disciplines, certain programs, they definitely require specific niche sector experience, or it could be legislative experience. However, from the world of digital, we're very much more broader than that, and it often depends on our clients. So sometimes a client will be driven to get experience from outside of their sector, because there could be a more mature digital footprint in certain sectors compared to others. Or we have other clients, and there is no exact science to this, other clients will say, oh, no, I absolutely want someone who understands the nuts and bolts of how our business operates to be able to apply a sensible and useful digital footprint for us. So I mean, it's hard to answer that with absolute clarity because it does depend on the market and the situation. The one thing I'd say about being a first-time interim new into the market, it comes back to what I said around delivery. So I think it's very important that anyone who has been in substantive posts up to now and is looking at the world of interim very much focuses on their tangible deliveries during those various positions. So, but without seeing CVs, I can't tell, but you need to really be able to demonstrate you've got the adaptability and you've got a focus on delivering outcomes within whatever roles you've had.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. One in from Tahir, well actually two in from Tahir, so they're related. He said that there's a lot of businesses seeking help and support, obviously, in the current scenario, but they're not used to using, or they haven't used IMs before. So typically, maybe SMEs, for example, and they're not quite sure what to do next, and so on. Are you seeing much of a growth there, or much of a demand, or is it still with the more traditional sized and scaled companies?
I think we have a real spread of client base in terms of size of whether it be staff or whether it be turnover. It is a broad mix. I think the key thing with helping anyone, whether it be an interim access the market or a client access the market, is to be really attentive and really clear from the very beginning in terms of the engagement and understanding and distilling down what the real areas of priority are. And sometimes we find what appears to be an initial conversation around this particular piece of work or that particular problem, actually there's an underlying issue that needs attention first. And I think it's that consulting approach that's valid and gets people back to this confidence piece, gets them feeling confident that yes, it's worth that engagement, it's worth that investment, and it leads to tangible results. And I think we're certainly seeing as well an appetite to see something tangible quickly. So there's a sense of, right, I get it, we've engaged the right provider, we've engaged the right interim, and we're already seeing value from that effort and engagement. It just gives people that boost. So, you know, what I would say that we're not seeing your multi-million pound 12-18 month transformation programs being signed off particularly frequently right now, but we are seeing a number of initiatives around we need to adjust this and then we build on it, and that's about developing the relationship to broaden out an engagement, really. Okay.
Are you, just linked to that again, so are you seeing, what do you feel could be done to kind of accelerate, ramp up those kind of activities, those inquiries? Is that something you're active in?
In terms of generating pipeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what a core of our team are involved with, and that's their job, it's their passion, it's their livelihood, being blunt. So they all link together, yeah, I think it's trying to focus in the areas that you believe, like I said about interims in the market, like where can we win, where have we got a track record, where are we going to be strongest. And there'll be, you know, some providers have a different footprint, obviously, to us, and different strengths, and we know our strengths, and it's trying to maximize and leverage those as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think you touched on it, but I'll just for clarity, in case, because there was a few people who weren't in at the beginning. In terms of sort of sign-off periods, so those businesses that are actually looking for interims now, are you finding they're relatively traditionally fast, or is the process, I think you touched on a little bit with the committee point, is that kind of elongated?
Yeah, I think, I mean, they say patience is a virtue, and I've got to say it can be quite a challenge at the moment to convert an initial conversation, an initial requirement into a speedy deployment, although it certainly isn't off the table completely. And we have had examples in recent weeks where there has been that traditional urgency, and many professional interims, seasoned interims will know there can be that need of, right, we've identified a problem, we need instant input and support, and there's a very quick turnaround. Although on balance, I would say things are taking longer than they used to. But I don't think that's just because of COVID. I think it's also about the last few years, because we've all been so immersed into the pandemic, understandably, we have actually forgotten that there was so much uncertainty still in the market that people were having to carve through and identify opportunities from. Yet that decision by committee idea was still there through all that as well. So with the Brexit scenarios, it really was a challenging time. And I think what we're trying to do now is manage the end-to-end process much more strongly, so that we know, well, if there are different gateways, what are they, and can we make each one specific and tailored rather than a repetition of the previous one. It's just trying to smarten up that process and make it more valuable for everybody.
Okay, thank you. One from Maria, and surprisingly, the first one so far, I think, on IR35. I mean, how can we not talk about that? So obviously, you guys have been involved through the public sector thing 3 years ago. So Maria's asking, how do you feel the private sector businesses are going to go? Are they going to take a more balanced approach, doing as it should be against each individual role on its merits, as against a sort of blanket inside IR35 determinations, or indeed like the banks, I guess, who decided they just weren't going to play ball and not use contract people at all? So.
Yeah, I mean that. Well, I mean that's almost a whole session in itself, but I'll do my best. What I would say is the private sector, and certainly the clients we were engaging with, bearing in mind it was a very last minute shift to delay it a year. So we'd already engaged a lot around what was going to happen, and a lot of it depends on who within organisations are the main decision makers. So to give an example, if a tax department or a legal stroke compliance department are the go-to team for IR35 policy, then they are going to be on the very much the risk averse side of the legislation. And we saw a lot more there where people were, and certainly some of the banks were doing this idea of like policy not to engage PSC contractors. Now, what we never got to find out was, what's the impact of that? Because if there's a legislatively driven or an exec board driven program or initiative, or a shareholder value deriving program that gets derailed because of a policy that could be construed as ill-founded, then suddenly that shifts, and then this whole idea of blanket decisions or policies around non-PSCs will change again, because then it becomes a different decision making point. What I would say about the difference between the public sector and the private sector is there's been an awful lot more time to get an understanding of what the legislation is intended to do, how it's intended to apply. And I mean, back in April 17, we were still having to deal with a beta version of the HMRC CES tool in the February, and the final legislation wasn't there really. Sorry, that was in the January, and the final legislation landed in the February, and it was go live from April. So that's been a big difference. And I think the key is an educational piece in the market, but also it's an impact piece around, well, what's the market prepared to accept? And the other thing that you can argue for the private sector will be an ability to look at commercial models perhaps more leniently than the public sector, who may, certainly for our NHS clients, there's rate caps on day rates depending on banding. So you're not able to have a commercial conversation that says, well, if a particular interim skill set is of significant value to you, yet you think it's an inside role, we're going to have to reflect some of that in a rate, then you do have a bit more flexibility in the private sector.
Okay, thank you. One around just on the subject of rates, have you seen the sort of general rates, and I realise that's a very generalised point, suppressed at all as a result of COVID, and as you come out of COVID?
I mean, the rate ranges on a given set of assignments has been so broad through all of this, and there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, you could have one opportunity compared to another opportunity, and the rates can be quite different, and that can be for a whole host of reasons. But I think it's very hard to be able to say with certainty, oh, that's what's happened to rates. It really does depend. Although one thing I would say is that we're seeing a bit more flexibility, and I think it's partly due to the fact that a number of people are working working remotely and are prepared to look at perhaps a body of days for over a given period, rather than thinking I've got to have full-time 5 days a week, X pound notes per day. I think there's a sense of, actually, you know what, I'm prepared to look at this. It's an interesting area. It's either a specialism or an area I'm keen to develop. And because the people's outgoings have gone down from compared to having to do all the commuting and the staying away and an awful lot of other costs that need to be covered, I think there is that flexibility baked into the market that people are prepared to show that flexibility around, and then use that as a lever to develop more work. Okay, thank you.
Another question around the supply of interims. So obviously with the pandemic, as we've seen, there's you know, increasingly redundancies generally around and so on. What's your kind of view and your take on using new entrants, if you like, who may or may not be, you know, between roles kind of scenario?
So you mean substantive people that are now looking for potential interim work?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really tricky one, because as I just said about the rates, then if there's a big rate range, and if seasoned interims are showing a bit of flexibility to gain continuity of income, then that usual benefit of someone going into the market, you know, typically over the years, if you're a first-time interim, you almost certainly would expect to be paid less than a seasoned professional interim who's been doing it for a number of years, has got a number of programs under their belt, has adjusted to different cultures and sectors or disciplines. So it depends how much of that differentiation is there, really. And yeah, I think it could be difficult for brand new interims into the market unless, as I've said earlier, there's a real ability to convey project-based delivery, adaptability, and all the traits you'd expect with seasoned interim professionals.
Okay, thank you. That's the questions in the bucket now covered. So I guess let's just go around, go to the audience, and if you've got more questions, please put them in quickly, because obviously we won't keep going if we don't need to. So anybody else, please type away very quickly. I'll give it a minute or so. If not, it looks like we've pretty much covered. Nope, nobody's coming in. No, here we go. There we go. Could you talk about fixed-term contracts, says John? In what aspect? I'm not quite sure, but what's your view on, I guess?
Well, okay, so I mean, there's definitely a market appetite for more fixed-term contracts, and certainly I would say that's client-led, clearly. What I would say is we saw in the public sector that people were moving. So, you know, when I talked earlier about the split between inside and outside, of course, if there are roles that are deemed inside and someone's skill set is very much aligned towards an inside type of role, then they are definitely considering more favourably than they would have a fixed-term contract for obvious reasons, because the various benefits are not nearly as great, and the tax position and that side of things. So I think that the challenge with fixed-term contracts is you end up in this bit of a no man's land, in that you've neither got the benefits of a permanent package and career management potentially, and you haven't got the benefits of interim day rates and outside delivery and that kind of thing. So although I think they're definitely increasing, I think we have to wait and see how that works in terms of different sectors and different disciplines, and it comes back to a supply and demand aspect, really, and it comes back to how clients will resolve their IR35 position winding forward to April next year. And then frankly it comes down to individuals in terms of, because is it something people would consider? Yeah, typically not. And historically I know of a lot of interims who would simply say an FTC is not for me, and that I get. Equally, depending on income requirements and what the market's doing, will dictate whether they become more prolific.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Another one in from Mark, and I guess this is good coming from you for sure. So as a new interim, he's saying, obviously, I make initial contacts with email. Should I be following up with a phone call soon after? Should I kind of wait? Should I take the lead?
I mean, as I said, and I'm only speaking for obviously the Practicus business, and other providers will have different approaches and different structures, but I would major on where you feel you've got a really, really strong track record you can convey with conviction, and you can convey with real confidence that you say, right, this is me, I can really, and then you elevate up. And I would follow up, and it's that balance of following up and hounding providers to the point where it's a hard one, that, but you just don't want to be in that position. Yeah, I think there should be dialogue, and I think if the people have conveyed why they feel they're suitable for an opportunity, then I think that should be followed up, definitely. And as I said at the earlier stage, I think it just from a mental well-being and a whole energy level perspective, applying for fewer roles and opportunities and positions that you feel really good about and really confident in, and tailoring CV, cover notes, and being able to demonstrate track record is better than going for this big sort of approach across the market and the numbers game, because that's not how most providers are geared. And I think it's also just quite soul destroying, the lack of contact you then get. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. From past experience, I've come across that myself, so I think I'd agree with you there very much. Sure. John's comment just around the FTC piece again. Do you see that very much as a kind of alternative approach that some clients are taking in their thinking around IR35, or indeed in public sector in direct experience of?
Yeah, absolutely right. So we definitely saw a shift for the public sector. As I mentioned, the fixed term contract became definitely more popular with clients, and interims, seasoned interims who you would say would typically not look at those roles, have taken those roles. And it's hard to know how the private sector will map across, but we do see more fixed term contracts than we used to. And I think that will be a common trend moving forward, albeit if, as I've said, it's just working through the market and the various nuances of the market, because if for whatever reason there aren't enough good interims prepared to take fixed term contracts around client specific high priority programs, then of course the traditional interim route will need to be revisited, because fundamentally delivering a strategic program for a big company is going to be absolutely more critical than having a fixed term contract route than an interim route, I would suggest. Certainly when you look at it on their own strategic level.
Great, thank you. One more question, which is around the public sector markets. Obviously Practicus is pretty big in public sector. In the period, oh, excuse me, over the last 3 years, and again, notwithstanding COVID effects and so on, what have you found in terms of the proportion of the numbers of interims going into opportunities? Have they, generally fallen, as is often people's expectation, because of the inside IR35 thing, or not, do you think?
I think for Practicus, bearing in mind, when we talk about public sector, the NHS is our biggest customer by a long way. So by the very nature of the NHS, it's often vocational interims who have been part of the health service through their career, have taken the decision at a given point that they would like to go interim. And so that's very much a vocation. They will stay in that sector, and that's how they will operate. In terms of broader public sector, I think that there's still a huge amount of public sector money is spent on interims, on more niche consulting, and there's definitely opportunity there. And it's just having access to that, and obviously building up the portfolio to be able to get into those programs and interim roles. What I would say is there's less interim substantive cover than there used to be. And that's where more fixed term contracts come in. So whereas historically a day rate interim could very feasibly go in for a several month maternity cover or long-term sick cover, we're seeing less of that. And the day rate interims are doing more of the service improvement, operational management, perhaps for on the substantive side, to cover the substantive side rather, and compared to those other types of roles that would historically have been quite a lucrative space for day rate interims to take on.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Any more questions, anybody? We've dried up again, so I think pretty much close to the end. Last opportunity for any more questions. We'll give it a second or two. No, looks like we're probably done. Okay, well, look, we're a few minutes short of time, so that's okay. We're on time then. So look, that concludes today's webinar. So we hope everybody found it useful. I'd really like to thank Darren for his time today and sharing lots of thoughts, lots of insights from your view, which is brilliant. A reminder to everybody on the call that you will receive an email link to the recording in a few days' time. And then lastly, the IIM is run by interims for interims. So we're always looking for volunteers to get involved. So if you are interested, please do get in contact. In the first instance, very simple email address, memberservices@iim.org.uk. And of course, small plug, if you're not yet a member and interested in finding out more, please check out the website, iim.org.uk/benefits. Or indeed you can contact member services as well. Other than that, thank you very much indeed, Darren, for your contributions today. Brilliant. And thank you everybody for attending, and see you at the next webinar.